Hi, I'm Jack Granlund. Welcome to CFO Online. Today's topic is going to be simple ways that you can make a lot more money in your business. Everybody who's ever owned a small business has looked around and said, if I could just get one big thing to happen, if I could get one big new customer, or if I could get my customers to take one big price increase, or if I could just find a vendor who will sell me product for just a lot less money, or if I could get by with 10 fewer employees. One big thing, and everything will be great. And of course, it never happens. What we're going to be talking about today are small things, half a dozen of them or so, that you can do that will dramatically improve the profitability of your business. If you have a $5 or $6 million business, together these things can add $200,000 to $300,000 a year of profits to your business. A little bit of work on sales, a little bit of work on your material costs, a little bit of work with your employees, a little bit of work with all your other costs. Taken all together, you're going to make a lot of money here. If you make a lot of money from these ideas, hit the like button. If you own a small or medium-sized business, subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. Let's talk about what kind of businesses these things work for. We're not really talking about businesses that have some problems with them. We're really looking for businesses that are generally pretty stable and generally, small to medium amount of profits coming out of them. The things that we're talking about here today, the steps that we're going to take, they don't really work real well for a business where, for one reason or another, your sales are dropping dramatically. Maybe you've got a product that people don't want anymore, or they've, some product that, is going out of fashion. Or if you've got a retailer, maybe they've closed the street in front of your business and nobody can get into the place. These steps don't really work well in those situations. But in situations where you have, reasonably consistent sales and reasonable amounts of profits, the small things we're talking about doing work really well and will dramatically improve your profitability. I've used these tools in many, many different businesses over the years. And it comes down to the simple things. There's going to be a little bit more revenue that you're going to work out. There's going to be some expense controls that you're going to manage, small amounts in multiple different places. And typically, what I have found is that 30 to 50% of the improvement that you get is going to come from managing your revenue. And another 50 to 70% is going to come from managing your expenses. Now, if you've got some great ideas about how to manage expenses and improve profitability in your business and things that you have done, why don't you leave a note in the comments section, and I'll talk about those in the future on another video. But let's get started on some of the ideas for how to manage your revenue. When we're working on managing our revenue, we're really looking at trying to do two different things, two simple things that we're going to do. One of them is on pricing your product. You're going to try and improve the pricing, increase your prices a little bit. And ideally, what you're looking for are going to be small price increases that happen all the time. The other place we're going to be looking at things are add-on sales, that next sale that you can make. Maybe it's a service contract, or maybe it's another retail item that you can sell for somebody who is already doing business with you. So let's get started on the first one. On the sales items where you're looking for a small increase that happens all the time. I'm going to give you a good story for this one. I used to run a picture framing operation. We had 15, 20 stores in the region we're in here. And we would price picture frames. Somebody would come in and they'd want to frame a picture of their kids or whatnot. And we had a manual system that we would do all the pricing on it. We installed a new point of sale system. In that point of sale system, there was a fee in there called a fitting charge, which is basically just a fee that we put together in there to put the whole thing back together, the whole frame back together for you. It was $1.50. And when I found out I could figure out a way to do that and manage that whole thing centrally, I increased that price from $1.50 to $4. Think $2.50, what's the big deal? That $2.50 was a really big deal, because we would do anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 frames every month, depending on the time of year. So that little $2.50 over and over and over again ended up making somewhere between $150,000 and $300,000 a year for the business. And nobody noticed. because it was a very small amount that happened all the time. The next thing that you can look at is how do you add an additional sale to somebody who is already there. This is a good example of, if you're in a restaurant business, are you going to sell a cup of coffee or a dessert when somebody's already at the table? You've already got them there buying something. Can you buy them something more? Or if you go into a Best Buy, you buy a television set, they're always going to try and sell you a service plan for that television set. Or you go and buy a car, they're going to try and sell you on financing the car with them, or maybe selling a service contract for that. That next sale that you've already made, where you've already made a sale, is a very powerful way to improve the profitability of your business. And it's a relatively simple and easy way to do that. Think about your business. In the comments section, why don't you leave some ideas about how you can improve the pricing on your products or services, lots of times in a small way, or things that you could sell in addition to the products or services you're currently selling to a customer. With a couple small changes that we talked about to the revenue side, you're probably going to see an improvement in your business of somewhere between 0.5% of sales and 2% of sales. So on a $5 million business, you're probably going to look at an improvement of somewhere between $25,000 and $100,000. Low end, it's really not all that much, but really we got to remember, this is just the start. The next area that we're going to look at is really controlling a couple of the manufacturing type of expenses, if you will. One of them is going to be your material costs, and one of them is going to be your manufacturing labor costs. With the manufacturing labor costs and the material costs, they're both really controlled by how much volume you're going to do. On the material side, the toughest part with that is twofold. You're really going to be looking at any kind of manufacturing changes, engineering changes, negotiating things that you might be able to, or reductions that you might be able to get from some of your vendors. And again, keep in mind, we're not talking about large changes. We're talking about, a little bit here and a little bit there. Now that said, there will be occasionally when you're making an engineering change, where you're making some sort of significant change to how you manufacture a product, you may be able to get quite a bit of savings out of that. But that doesn't really happen all that often. On the labor side, what you're really looking for are, again, small changes. Reducing hours when you can, controlling overtime as much as you can, hiring new people more slowly, replacing people more slowly, making sure that you're getting as much as you can out of every dollar that you're spending. And really what you're looking for are small amounts of change, things that you normally overlook and say, well, that's a lot of work for not really very much. And that's true. Sometimes it's a tough thing to be able to manage. But really what you're trying to accomplish is to be able to find yet a little bit more, another $20,000, another $30,000, so that cumulatively, when we find 4 or 5 or 6 of these things, we're looking at, $150,000, $200,000, $300,000 by the time we're all done with it. It all adds up, and it adds up pretty quickly. The last area that we're going to look at, it's going to be the areas where we're covering by general and administrative expenses and selling expenses, and then fixed expenses, both of which are controllable to a certain extent, and you can get a little bit of savings out of each one. Let's start with the general, administrative, and selling expenses. Really what you're looking at here is how many people you've got sitting around in your office, how much you're paying your salespeople. One of the things I learned early on in my career is that one of the expenses you like to see going up is your selling expenses, because theoretically you're selling more. But what we're talking about in this situation is taking a hard look at your selling expenses and making sure that you're actually getting value for those. It's very easy to get into a routine where you're paying a relatively large amount of money to somebody to sell your product, when what's happening is the customer ultimately is doing business with your business, your firm, as opposed to the customer who they are looking at and saying, or the salesperson that they're looking at, and you may be able to reduce some of your costs there. G&A expenses, really it just becomes a question of taking a hard look at all of those little office expenses that you have that you just become accustomed to, And some of those are payroll, some of those are people, some of those are just expenses that you're accustomed doing, taking people out for lunch, buying pizza for people. I'm not saying that we don't do those things. What I'm saying is that we look at them closely, because ultimately what we're trying to do is to get another 1 or 2% out of all of those other types of expenses that you've got going on there. And if you can manage that, then you come up with a pretty good situation. You save a lot of money. Fixed expenses, now that's one where you can either get nothing or you can get a whole lot. And sometimes those take a little bit longer to manage your way through. These are big expenses, things like, if you have a big insurance bill for you're a very capital intensive business, trying to find a way to get around that, or finding cheaper leases if you're renting space. These things can often take anywhere from many months to sometimes several years. But if you're conscious about it and you're thinking about how you can save those expenses, you can save an awful lot of money. One of the things you end up with in a fixed expenses is you occasionally will go through a case where you have the opportunity to do something in a very opportunistic sort of way. For example, if a facility becomes available that's more inexpensive than you would normally expect it to be, that might be something worth jumping on. Or if you have the ability to be able to reduce your insurance expenses in a large way. This is one of those few places where I'm talking about trying to make small changes where you can actually make really big changes. I hope you found this useful. A lot of these little changes that you can do are easy enough to do, and you really don't think about them because they're so simple. And they really don't seem like they're worth it. But if each one of these things is done in sequence, if you go through and do all of them, you're going to save an awful lot of money. You go through and you make some small changes in your pricing that's used very, very frequently. You find ways to be able to sell just a little bit more to each customers. You take a hard look at your material costs and how you manufacture your products, and you get very aggressive about being able to manage your direct labor and your manufacturing labor. Then you take a hard look at your general administrative expenses and your selling expenses. Basically, you're just really re-looking at everything you've been doing in the past. And lastly, you take a look at your fixed expenses and see if there's a way of being able to reduce some of those. Each one of these things by themselves is probably not going to produce more than 0.5% to 2% of sales improvement. And it doesn't really seem like very much. But by the time you add it all up, again, on a $5 million, $6 million business, it's easy to be able to get to a 4 to 5 to 6% improvement on sales. So now all of a sudden, a 4% improvement on a $5 million business, that's $200,000 a year that goes in your pocket. It doesn't take all that much. If you've liked this video, if you found it helpful, hit the like button. If you own a small or medium-sized business, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.